Hello everybody, this is a meeting of Living in Hackney and it's been held in Hackney Town Hall. I'd like to welcome everybody that's here tonight. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed now. Please can you keep all your microphones on mute throughout the meeting. This will prevent audio feedback. If you're still getting feedback, please turn off nearby devices. If you'd like to speak, raise your hand to get my attention. State your name and who you are before you make a comment. The chat function must not be used to have conversations with other participants or provide personal information. All chat is recorded and it is a formal meeting. Please only use the chat function to alert me that you wish to speak or raise points of order or to report tech problems. Officers will try to assist you. The press, as this is a formal meeting, the press may well be in attendance. The rights of the press and public to record this meeting, they have the right to record this meeting. Right, item number 1 is apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Councillor Adjera. I've got no apologies for lateness. Joining virtually is Councillor Ozen and Councillor Rout, and all the officers who will introduce themselves when they come in. As a special guest tonight, we've got Councillor Vincent Stopps with us. And
flourish of trumpets.
There's no urgent items of business, and the business is set out as it is. Are there any declarations of interest? None received. Thank you. So the meeting tonight is discussing the Council's energy strategy and energy systems in light of the Council's commitment to net zero energy and the commitment by all the scrutiny panels to look at the Council's net zero energy work in light of our commitments and of receiving net energy carbon by 2040, and the fact that it's also COP26, and I think the world perhaps, I hope the world is focused on it, but I don't think all the leaders of the world are quite as focused on it perhaps as they should be. I'm not naming names, but right, yeah, the Council, yeah. No names, precisely. Yes. This item is aimed at giving the Commission an overview of the Council's energy strategy, its objectives and the energy systems needed to meet the Council's net zero carbon targets. This session will cover the review of the Council's energy strategy and the roadmap to achieving net zero carbon by 2040 for Hackney Council's emissions, considering its broader trade-off between new technologies and going greener against higher bills, cost implications, looking at local planning policy in relation to achieving net zero carbon targets and sustainable development. I'll ask, before anybody else, I bring everybody else in, I'd like to ask Councillor Stopps if he's ready.
Yes.
I'm going to take Councillor Stopps first to tell us about
engineered timber
buildings, which may or may not be a way of the future of helping our net zero carbon targets. And then I will take a presentation from the planning service first, followed by a presentation for the energy team. I'd like to thank all the officers for all their hard work and producing these reports tonight that we've got, and I'd also like to welcome to the meeting Councillor Guy Nicholson, Deputy Mayor and Cabinet Member for Housing Supply, Planning, Culture and Inclusive Economy, Councillor Mette Coburn, Cabinet Member for Energy, Waste, Transport and Public Realm, Councillor Vincent Stopps, who's here as Chair of Planning, Ali Richards, Strategic Director of Sustainability and Public Realm. Roti Ajalori, sorry, I haven't pronounced her name right, Head of Procurement. Mary Adebola, Head of Energy and Carbon Management. Apologies if I pronounce anybody's name wrong. Casey Glasgow, Strategic Planning Manager. Barry Cockland, Major Projects Planner. Rachel Weaver, Planning Policy Officer. And Andrew Emoji, Project Manager. And I don't know if they're in. Is the Residents Liaison Group, are they logged in? I haven't seen them.
Steve was logged in.
Sorry?
Steve was
Yeah,
logged in.
yeah, I'm here, yeah.
Okay, and also in attendance is the Council's Resident Liaison Group, who represent the Council's tenants. So I'd like to thank everybody. Council Stops. 5 minutes.
Thank you. I didn't know I was going to be first on
Sorry.
the agenda. Great to be here. Thank you very much. I wonder if you could just put one.
Would you use your mic? Sorry.
Okay. These mics are working, are they?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so thank you for inviting me this evening. Yes, I'm the chair of Hackney's Planning Committee. I've been so for 16 years, 15 and a half years. And I've been invited along to come and talk about engineered timber in construction. And the reason why it's so important in terms of what we're looking at this evening is if you look at the global production of carbon, 8%, that's 8%, so 1/12 of the world's carbon is connected to the cement that goes into concrete in the world. You can hear me? So a huge, huge amount of carbon is associated with construction industry. In Hackney, we are privileged to have 24, I think it is, of the world, the world's largest, and that's what you can see in front of you, timber constructed building. So instead of classic construction material of concrete, the structural material in the building is timber, engineered timber, and so it's a process. It's like a plywood panel, but much, much stronger. It can be built there up to 10 stories. That's the largest volume of timber in the world. And lo and behold, it's renewable. So what is not to like about this stuff? It sequestrates, so it holds carbon in its structure for the next 60 years in that case. And it is happening now, and it can happen now. The exact time we need to take carbon out of the atmosphere, we can start to build it. We can get that material from well-managed forests. There are lots of it. The forests of Europe and indeed the world are growing as we plant more and more trees to do what we think is good for trees. The planning process, however, is flawed insofar as it only worries itself about energy operation carbon. So you'll hear this evening, planning service and planning does quite a lot of good. In Hackney, I think a lot of good in terms of sustainability, etc. We worry ourselves about water, we worry ourselves about energy, we worry ourselves about the climate and managing the future of our town, we worry quite a lot about how much heat is used and how much cooling is used in those buildings. But unfortunately, the planning system, the planning process, doesn't worry itself about the embodied carbon, so how those buildings are constructed. And this is a huge, huge gap. And the reason it's there is for two reasons. Historically, it's been difficult to actually gauge how much carbon is involved over the lifetime. And the second reason is the concrete industry don't want us really to understand these issues. They would like to do the same as they've done for the last 60, 70, 100 years and keep producing There is some movement on this. The building regulations are, I understand, to be changed soon, and that will allow, will look at how much carbon is embodied in buildings, and so that's good news. But the planning process needs to address these issues, and I hope they will. If you put the other photograph on, this is another wonderful building in Shoreditch. Is it done up the second one?
That photo is cleverly
Sorry.
called two trains just about to pass one another.
There's a second photo there.
It's of a piece of wood.
Okay. And the reason why we're able to put 2 or even 24 up there is because Hackney, across the whole world, is leading in this material. Without a shadow of a doubt, we've got the single architect who built that building. That's going to be the largest office building in the world, made of cross-laminated timber. It's a timber building that has been the first timber office that's been constructed since the Great Fire of London. We do have this fire issue. The government misunderstands the difference between fire performance and combustibility, and we need to work that through. But we also need to work through how the planning system can start to encourage more timber buildings, renewable wood buildings. I go on site, one more minute, I go on site, and the guys on site love this material because it's not dusty. The neighbours love this material because it's only 20 vehicles wide instead of hundreds of concrete mixing vehicles. There are huge number of reasons why we should be constructing in timber, and we should be taking this material seriously. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you'll include something in your report.
Thank you, Councillor Stocks. I don't know if you mentioned it, I couldn't quite hear. When the buildings are built, how carbon neutral are they?
They are carbon negative.
They're negative.
Carbon negative.
So they're very carbon efficient to build. They come from renewable energy, and they're carbon negative.
That's right. So carbon, the act of tree growing sequestrates is the long strange word takes up carbon from the atmosphere, and it will sit in that building for the next 60 years. And that's the time we want it to happen. You know, we need to get ahead of ourselves in terms of carbon sequestration. It's far better than putting it down into holes in the ground and hoping it goes well.
Okay, thanks. That was very interesting. Anybody else got any questions?
Okay.
Sorry, Claire.
That's all right. Not sitting in a good place. Thank you, Councillor Stocks. I note that on the planning committee, you frequently ask developers if they've considered using timber, and more often than not, the answer is no. So, what are the downsides, and why do you think they're reluctant to use this material?
Well, the issue at the moment is the government has decreed that there is a concern about timber and its fire performance. All the architects, all the fire people you will talk to will say that, well, apart from some clearly, will dispute this. But the negative effect of Grenfell has put back the cause of timber buildings for many years. And so the difficulties of getting insurance for very tall buildings has become almost impossible. Those sorts of the 6-storey timber building, they're fine. The offices are fine, so we can still continue to do some. We've got to work at this from 2 angles, really. There's the planning process angle, the concrete industry, and this fire issue. For the record, heavy timber chars. It does not ignite and go up in flames like a box of matches. It chars very slowly. It's an understandable material that all the high performance people understand visibility of the box patches and the performance of the building.
There haven't been any major fires. They're involved.
There was one when it was being constructed, because when it was being constructed, it was open to all manner of winds and what have you. So you've got to be careful when you construct these things, and you've got to, do the right thing. But once they're built, they have good fire performance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stocks. Right, thank you very much for coming at such short notice. And
Microphone.
sorry, thank you, Councillor Stocks, for coming at such short notice and telling us about these timber engineered buildings, which I found really interesting, and hopefully we can find a way of using more of them in the future. I'd like to invite Ali Britchers and Katie Glasgow to unmute and to commence the planning section of the meeting, please.
Sorry, Councillor Patrick,
Councillor Coburn put his hand up, sorry.
sorry to interject. I just wanted to just check I might have got it wrong, but I think it was the energy strategy were meant to go first. I just wanted to double check that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
No. According to my notes, I've got the,
They want to do it that way, then that's fine.
have I read it wrong?
No, they can do it that way if they want.
Yeah, the planning section.
Do you want to do it the other way round?
They want to do it the other way around.
Yeah, it does say that actually on the agenda.
But if they want to do it the other way round,
And
they can do it the other way round.
we can do the other way around, sorry, the agenda says.
It's not an issue. Sorry, I thought we were briefed to say it was the energy strategy, but if it's we'll stick to plan. I'm okay as long as the officers are fine, because I'm conscious obviously of the timings. But if we might have got the briefing the wrong way around. But yeah, we'll carry on. Sorry, Councillor Patrick.
Let's do it as the way it's on the agenda then. Sorry, it's Mary and
Katie, Alid.
Katie and Alid.
what's Mary and Roachmore,
Katie and
Alajor.
No, it's
Katie and Alid.
That's the planning piece, Chair. Sorry.
I know that's sorry. People keep telling me they want to do it a different way. I know planning, and then Councillor Coburn said he wanted to do energy.
Okay.
Sorry.
Let's do the planning first.
Yeah, if we've got it up there.
We've got it up now. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, Alice and Katie. Sorry, please do continue. I'm terribly sorry about this. Best laid plans of mice and men.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Just to give you a brief overview, the purpose of the Low Carbon Development Programme and Action Plan is to secure low carbon buildings and infrastructure via borough planning by 2030. The goal is for the local plan to have the most robust policies and guidance that support low carbon development and adaptation to climate change. So across London Council, Hackney is the lead borough on low carbon development, but I'll explain that later. Ensuring communities are part of the climate change action mitigation plans and have an understanding of how the various climate action measures form part of a coordinated plan is pretty crucial, hence the role of planning. It is clear that the majority of residents in the borough are behind us in addressing climate change, and we need to tap in more effectively to this groundswell of support. Planning, therefore, is a pivotal role in this, as it brings together a whole range of climate change initiatives such as green infrastructure, play streets, sustainable transport, green economy, green building construction, as you heard from Councillor Stopps, living roofs and walls, green energy, low carbon new development into a spatial plan which residents can relate to and understand how all these initiatives fit together to create a sustainable community for the future. So therefore, it's crucial we develop an innovative engagement techniques with the communities, especially those hard to reach communities, in helping draft local plans and area master plans. This will be key, not only to tap in to the silent majority, but those who feel excluded, and ensure we have the community buy-in in addressing the climate emergency. Therefore, the draft action plan, which Katie will outline shortly, will aim to deliver that and ensure a consistent approach to community engagement and low carbon development policies and spatial planning, not only in Hackney, but across all London boroughs. Now, if we go to the next slide, now for the boring bit. Just to give you an overview of the various work streams which London councils are leading on at the moment. If you see at the bottom of the slide, you will see 7 boxes. Now, London councils working with members and the Transport and Environment Committee have set up 7 working groups. Each authority on those are leading that work stream. And as you see, the second one is low carbon development. So there are a number of really important work streams here, such as retrofit, such as low carbon transport, renewable energy, reducing consumption emissions, building the green economy and creating a green resilient London. And all of those will have action plans associated with them, which will be leading up to ultimately a borough action plan for not just Hackney, but for other boroughs. Now, you'll notice that there's quite a robust governance structure within the London councils, where you have on the left-hand side, you have a number of officer groups from the climate office, the coordination groups, which are effectively the lead officers for all those work streams, feeding in climate change mitigation across London. If you go to the next slide, that gives you a bit more detail on the work streams, which are London councils, and those are the ones, as you can see, with the low carbon development intrinsically links into most of these work streams, including retrofit, creating a resilient and green London. And I think the low carbon development coming up from what Councillor Stobbs has eloquently indicated is that the role of building control and how we can go through all the red tape which the post-Grenfell building control regulations created in order to release the initiative we need to build green buildings and living buildings and secure low carbon buildings in the authority. Now, what we've done in Hackney is to emulate the same structure you've got in London Council. So there is an individual officer groups in Hackney which deal with all of those 7 work streams. If we go to the next slide. Now, the internal governance is that you see at the bottom, those are the climate action plan working groups within Hackney itself, which feed down from the London Council's one. That then feeds up to effectively strategic officer climate group with the lead officers there. And that in turn feeds up to the environmental sustainability board, which we've refreshed the membership with senior officers of the council and cabinet members. And I think Councillor Coban is within the sustainability board. And that board is going to be crucial in building up a climate action plan over the next coming months. If you go to the next slide. Now, we, as Councillor Stobbs has already indicated, we are in a very favourable position because we do have a number of really, really talented, sustainable thinking architects within Hackney and really eager to push green architecture within Hackney. Now, not all of these are in Hackney. This is not a quiz. I know exactly where all these buildings are. For example, the first one you see is the University of Nottingham. Then you have the Passive House in Norwich, which is the second. And then you have more ambitious ones, such as the Forest Tower in Milan. However, we are very proud that we have on the middle one at the bottom is the winner of the Hackney Design Awards in 2020, which was a superb example of a retrofit using recyclable timber with real-time environmental monitoring. And that was the winner of the Design Awards in 2020. And I was just worried for a minute that would actually replicate the Dalston and Shoreditch developments which Councillor Stobbs introduced, but we have another one there in Hackney. So I'm going to hand you over now to Katie. Sorry, forgot Katie, forgot your name for a minute. Katie Glasgow's the Senior planning officer in terms of local plans, and she'll go now into a bit more detail on what is low carbon development and the next action plans coming up.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Yes, my name's Katie Glasgow. I'm Strategic Planning Manager, and I'm going to elaborate and provide more details on the action plan, including the objectives and some of the emerging actions. And as part of this, I want to highlight the role of planning in achieving net zero carbon as well. So I think, what is low carbon? I think Aled has covered a lot of this in his introduction, and I think it's important to highlight that it's not just about individual developments, but it's also about the wider programs and the collective influence that we can have by ensuring that all development is low carbon. So planning plays a vital role in achieving this. The core purpose of planning really is about creating places that enable people to live happy and healthy lives. And it's not possible to achieve this aim without thinking about climate change and adaptation and resilience measures through spatial plans, and really ensuring that we're engaging communities as part of this process. So I want to talk about why we can make a difference. So through this low carbon action plan, it is a combination of influence and impact. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about through that. So firstly, control and influence. So building regulations set the initial baseline, and we're in a fortunate position in London where we have a good number of policies on achieving low carbon and zero carbon. And this gives us the control and influence to make change. So in Hackney, in the local context, we have a recently adopted local plan last year, and it requires all new development to be zero carbon. And that goes beyond the London plan policy. And this requirement reflects the local circumstances. So in Hackney, we have a large proportion of small scale development, and we want to ensure that we make a real difference and capture that development. And where development cannot meet these requirements on site, they're required to provide either off-site contributions or cash and lieu payment through the Carbon Offset Fund. And to date, the Council has negotiated contributions totalling £4.5 million. We also have policy around existing developments, so ensuring that the reuse and extension of buildings achieve the maximum feasible reductions in climate emissions, whilst being very sensitive to sort of character and heritage considerations. Rising to the challenge of climate change is a theme that runs through this plan. So LP33 also has a range of other policies around promoting climate change mitigation, adaptation and resilience measures, which Aled talked about in terms of promoting green infrastructure, urban greening, promoting health and well-being, and sustainable transport measures. So we have the ability to also influence through area-based plans. So in Hackney, we're producing a number of area-based plans for our key growth areas. To name a few is Shoreditch, Stamford Hill. We're also preparing plans for major town centres of Dalston and Hackney Central. So there are further opportunities to develop policy and guidance on climate change adaptation and mitigation that responds to local circumstances. So we also have a decision-making function, and this brings me to my next point on innovation. So we have the power to influence at the pre-application stage in particular. So we will have a real opportunity to engage with developers and architects early on in the process, so at the pre-application stage, to work with them and to look at the designs that can really innovate and inspire and deliver low carbon or zero carbon. And I think that's a really, really important point. Then moving on to economic benefits. So these are a key driver for this work stream, the green economy. And as part of that, we have the issue of fuel poverty. So ensuring new development is zero carbon is really important, where we have particularly ambitious affordable housing targets. And I think delivering low carbon and zero carbon development can also make a real difference. So in terms of impact, we're aware that in Hackney, the vast majority of Hackney's built environment will exist in 2100, and it's already standing. And this makes a significant contribution to carbon emissions. So it's equally important, what is equally important, is that we're aware that 10% of emissions come from construction process. And regarding the scale of development, in London, the need is to deliver 52,000 new homes per year, and in Hackney 1,300, and alongside that obviously much needed commercial development and infrastructure to support that growth. So there's a real opportunity here to ensure that new development is low carbon. And then moving to the final point around inspiration, this is the collection of the images that Aled was talking to. So this workstream has a real potential to inspire. So these iconic buildings can be really inspirational. But think about these in terms of them coming forward in a particular area like Hackney, or a collection of these buildings coming forward. So there's a real opportunity to show a generation what a different sustainable design can make. So a bit on the scope of what we can achieve. So the first thing we think about in achieving low carbon development is around zero carbon targets and how buildings perform once they are built. And this is quite well embedded into policy and through the London Plan. And obviously Hackney, we have our own ambitious targets. But an area that we need to focus on is where the differences are across boroughs and where there is scope to undertake research to implement policies and ensure that they can be delivered. So we have the point on that Councillor Stopps mentioned around embodied carbon, and so hopefully this is welcomed. So the carbon that goes beyond just the building materials and into the manufacturing and construction process. So I think this is something that certainly this work stream will be looking at. And linked to this is the circular economy. So looking at the whole life carbon assessment and at carbon emissions resulting from materials and construction and the use of the building over its entire life, including its demolition disposal. So moving on to how we will get to low carbon. So I've got a couple of slides on how we can do that. And as part of that, I want to talk about some of the emerging actions that are coming forward in the action plan. So there's 4 key areas. So the first one is collaborate. So the first point being around working across policy development, management and building control and creating an understanding, a common approach and measurable outcomes. Second point around creating dialogue with communities and industries to understand the barriers and opportunities. And this third point, establish the links to other climate programs, particularly retrofit, low carbon transport and resilient and green. This is Alan touched on earlier. And the final point around cross-boundary initiatives. So I think we do really well to look at policies across London, and boroughs obviously develop their own local planning policy, as we've done in Hackney. But is there a bit of work to look at cross-boundary issues and where there is scope to develop some form of sub-regional planning guidance and planning policy? Some of the emerging actions coming out of the collaborate is action 1, to undertake an audit of borough local plans and understand where the differences lie and the reasons for that as well. And action 2 is to produce and publish a community engagement guidance document. So those are the initial actions emerging from collaborate. So I'll just move on to innovate. So this is linked to the research that we do and looking at how we can push the boundaries and develop policies that can be implemented and monitored. So this point is around developing low carbon research and guidance to enable boroughs to develop low carbon and zero carbon policies. Number 3 is to commission research, particularly around viability, technical research on new technologies. So there's a real need to understand what the constraints are and the barriers around viability and the potential issues with compliance with building regulations. Part of this research involves understanding the potential conflicts around our objectives, and the low carbon operational development and how we address these issues. Action number 4 is to develop best practice guidance in decision making and guidance on how to implement the policy. So it's very important that we have the policy, but it's also making sure that we implement it and that we get some best practice in place. And action number 5 is moving on from developing this best practice and monitoring, looking at how we can monitor what is built. So making sure that it's in accordance with planning policy, understanding how much development approved is low carbon, how much is approved through carbon offsetting, and what is actually being achieved. So for example, through the fabric of buildings. So we're very keen to explore this further with other boroughs, and there's potential there to look at adopting some agreed performance indicators around that. And the final action is sort of going back to my earlier point around inspiring and pushing the boundaries around design, and is that to establish a recognised scheme or awards to showcase low carbon development, possibly zero carbon. I hope that features. So moving on to simplify. So I think there is a balance to be struck here around how much of this can be achieved through a pan-London approach and how much through the boroughs. But I think what we need to do is simplify where we can, and also where possible and where practical, develop a pan-London approach. So as part of this, we'll be pushing for effective national policy, and legislation and planning and building control. So some of the actions arising through the simplify area is action number 7, to develop a pan-London approach on aspects of low carbon development not already covered by the London Plan. And part of that is looking at policy guidance for area-based plans. And action number 8 is to ensure effective lobbying for national planning and building control reforms. And as part of that is to identify a forward plan of opportunities to respond to consultations so that we can ensure we do that in a timely manner. And finally is to upskill. I think this is a really important one, and it's probably an area where many boroughs are particularly facing challenges at the moment. There's a need to boost the understanding of skills within local authorities and create confidence amongst professionals and what can be achieved. So the final action is to make recommendations to boroughs to increase skills, looking at various training initiatives and programs for councillors and officers. So I wanted to highlight this is very much a partnership approach. There are various types of people and organisations that need to be involved, especially communities. As Aled outlined, we're quite early in our journey in terms of developing the action plan. We've established our working groups and steering groups, but we have a draft action plan in place, which we're looking to finalise and agree towards the end of this year. So there's lots of really good work that is emerging through this process. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting. A lot to take in, especially for some of us who are not experts. So that was really interesting, and a lot to take in for some of us that are not experts in any means. I mean, you talk about member training. I think I don't know about other members. I think I certainly need training. I think we've all been on a very steep learning curve recently. I think I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but I've got a question that's on page 1, point 1.3. The report refers to developments that cannot be meet the site requirements for net carbon zero, and therefore that you ask for a one-off payment. How does it happen for a development? How does this happen? I mean, what happens? Who makes the decision that a site cannot be net zero carbon? And how do we decide the money goes into a fund? I think, if I read correctly, I think there's a set target for each kilowatt. Is that £0 or whatever it is that's offset? And is there a lot of offsetting? Does it happen a lot in the borough? And if so, is it small? Is it people doing small building works that can't find a way of doing it, or is it large developers who don't want to do it? And who makes the final decision about whether we accept the offsetting?
Would you like me to come in now? Do the questions now? I can happy to respond now.
Yeah, fine. Go for it, Katie.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so a few questions there. I'll try and make sure I've covered all of them. So yeah, as a planning application comes in, there'll be obviously assessed by colleagues in development management, and we have specialist officers that deal with sustainability aspects. So they will consider and they'll help submit as part of that an energy statement and a sustainability statement, and that will indicate whether or not the development is able to achieve the carbon reduction requirements. So if they're not able to satisfy those, they would then need to make a contribution, and that's in accordance with our planning obligations supplementary planning document. So it sets out what the contribution is, and yeah, as you pointed out, there's the rate set there in terms of £95 per tonne over the 30 years. So it's a flat rate of the 2,850. What that then does go into the carbon offset fund, and then in terms of how that money is spent, so the decisions are made through the Still Section 106 board, and projects can be put forward for that, but it would need to be in accordance with the objectives of the carbon offset fund. So that would be outlined in the SPD. So there are some projects and funds have been allocated already. We gave some examples in the report in section 1.17 in relation to the energy company and a solar pilot leisure centres project and a green homes program. So that's to give you an idea about how that money is being spent. I think we did have a bit of a look before this meeting in terms of some of the types of development, and it does look like it's a combination of both majors and minor development, and there will be a range of considerations about whether or not they can meet those carbon reduction requirements, things to do with the technical feasibility, the technical aspects, also in relation to the viability comes into play as well. And yeah, obviously with smaller sites that can be more challenging to meet those requirements. So often not, we do get contributions, carbon offset contributions coming through. I'm hoping that's kind of covered the majority of the questions, but do let me know if I have missed anything.
Yeah.
Councillor Rathbone.
Is it on?
Councillor Patrick can do it.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Katie. Yeah, great presentation and good answer as well. I just had two very simple questions. One was, how do you cut construction CO2 emissions if they're 10%? And although this is all about low carbon buildings, infrastructure and new buildings, as it were, how does this apply to the building of social housing in particular? Thank you.
I can probably come in with the 10% there. There is no one solution to this. There's a plethora of different solutions in terms of land use planning, green, mixing it with the sustainable transport, and also looking at more information on and improvements on the build. And all of those together will bring down the construction costs. So as Councillor Stopps eloquently said previously, that those timber buildings, the amount of lorries which are required are significantly lower to get those materials on site than should it be a concrete construction. And there are many other ongoing issues with the construction cost. So there is not one solution, but there's a palette of different solutions which a local authority could insist on in order to reduce the carbon footprint of construction. Katie, do you want to come into the second one, which I think was regarding social housing?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I guess to highlight in terms of planning policy, obviously we have the ability, influence and control, but it's in relation to new development as it comes forward. So, you know, where an application would come forward for housing, sort of regardless of tenure, the requirements would apply. So that development would need to comply with the sort of carbon reduction targets set out in our local plan and in the London plan. But there is also, touching on the point where we've got the policy around the existing development. So if we're thinking about sort of existing estates, I think where there's any sort of refurbishment works done, the policies are in place to ensure that we look to reduce as far as possible the carbon kind of emissions in that development, and, you know, hopefully towards zero carbon.
Can I just add that retrofit is going to be huge in terms of going forward. There's a huge price tag associated with it, and I think in the next Living in Hackney scrutiny meeting, there will be a number of papers on housing and retrofit action plans going forward.
So if I could just follow up on that, because actually I was going to ask this later, and also I see from the climate change work stream that actually the London boroughs of Enfield and Waltham Forest are actually dealing with retrofit. Today the council has announced a retrofit programme. Very, very good to see my colleague Councillor Coban in front of the camera again. I'm just wondering how much can be done, as it were, with the limited amount of money that seems to be available. It's going to be extremely costly, isn't it, to do all the retrofit?
That's coming up next meeting.
I know that's coming up next meeting, but I'd like to hear something of an answer now, please.
Yes, the price tag is pretty eye-watering, but it's going to be a combination of leverage as well. The local authority wouldn't be able to do this on its own. So a lot of this is in the action plan, which Enfield is leading on, had a prompt funding about 200k. So they are a lot more advanced than many other work streams, and they've already got a really good action plan together, which has been discussed with other councils. And I think for the next meeting, we can show in terms of the financing of retrofit in the future, there's some of the options which are available. And if Councillor Rathbone would want to wait, then we would be having quite a detailed paper for the next scrutiny, which is mid-November, on retrofit, and enlighten you on some of the quite exciting action plans which Enfield's been leading on, but Hackney's been involved in as well.
I think I can wait, Ailid. Thank you.
Councillor Coban.
Councillor Coban.
No, just as a note to Ian as well. I think, sorry, I had to come off for like 5 minutes, but there was a paper published today by London councils around sort of retrofit as well. So obviously, as you would all be aware, and I'll talk to this a bit later in the meeting, but through London councils, there are 7 different thematic areas, obviously, which we're also following for our climate action plan in Hackney. And one of them is obviously around sort of around retrofit, and Enfield was leading on it, and there is a paper around that. And obviously, there's going to be a lot more around that. So I'm happy to circulate that to you all separately. I know that the mayor's heavily involved in it, and he had a panel on it this morning together with the deputy mayor, Shirley Rodriguez, as well.
I've got another question. Do we have any, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, any examples of innovative practice apart from the timber building, especially in the way of heating or in any new development? I mean, I've read a lot in this report about district heating systems, heat pumps, ground heat sources, solar panels, etc. And I just wondered if we knew how some of these new buildings are meeting their zero net carbon targets, and which sort of heating systems that they are using. I don't know if anybody knows of any examples. Obviously, I don't want the exact addresses, but it'd be interesting to know what sort of things are being developed, because there seems to be a range of technologies out there, and different people advocating for different sorts of technologies, and it'd be interesting to know what is being used.
Yeah, I think that's something we could definitely take away and look at in a bit more detail. Or perhaps, sorry, Mary, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, no, I suppose I could talk on that a little bit. I do know that across a lot of the newer buildings is coming through Hackney because of the planning policies, obviously, that we have to encourage net zero, and some of the policies coming out of GLA. There is a hierarchy of heat that these buildings need to adopt and have to comply with. So we're seeing a mix of technology interventions, and I think, to be honest, the route to net zero would need this different type of innovation. So we're seeing opportunities where we're using air source heat pumps, but also there are developments where they have to have district heat network, and that's a planning and GLA requirement. So it is quite a mix. But what we know that it's happening as well is there is a shift away from gas, especially in the newer builds. We've got some schemes which may be considering an hybrid approach, which is essentially where we're using heat pump technology as the base load, but we may be topping up in peak seasons with gas. But I think those are few and far between as well. But yeah, it is a mix of approach as far as I understand, only because I'm privileged to sit in some of the M&E consultants when they propose the solutions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Joseph.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just following up on.
I sit in the middle.
Can you hear me? Oh yeah, is that one?
Yep.
I really welcome the retrofitting, and I'm looking forward to hearing that report. So thank you, and thank you, Katie, for your report this evening. I suppose for me, it feels that in a way the elephant in the room is that we really need to be developing less. I just don't see that there is any way that we are going to have continued building in the way that we are at the moment, and significantly lower our carbon contributions. And I note that the independent report essentially said the same thing that we're going to look at later. But really, the best thing we can do is refurbish buildings rather than demolish structurally sound, relatively young buildings, often for quite aesthetic reasons. So I'm just wondering, are there any incentives being offered to those who come along with a plan for refurbishment over demolition? And is that something that we as council are going to be following going forward? Because a lot of the time buildings are being knocked down that potentially have quite a bit more life in them. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think really, really important question. And I think, yeah, it's highlighting kind of when I'm talking about sort of the circular economy and the whole life carbon assessments, which is kind of coming through, especially with the London plan. And I think this is quite an emerging field, but it's something that we are needing to consider more and more as applications come forward. Looking at how they're kind of addressing the energy hierarchy, but yeah, as you say, looking at kind of that whole life carbon cycle and what that can offer. I think undeniably there's a need to deliver more homes and more development to support growth. There are obviously challenges around that, but I think too, with this work streams, looking at the way in which we can innovate designs. So I think that's really important. So looking at the design of schemes and engaging with developers and landowners really early on in the process to have those discussions to make sure that they are considering these things at the outset and building that into the design. That's but it's a really important point that you've made with regards to sort of development and development pressures.
I haven't seen any other members. I've got one final question before we move on. Going back to the carbon fund, It says its estimated value is over 4 million, but I don't think we've quite got all the 4 million in. I don't know if that's, we think how the 4 million is going to be achieved. My other thing is, you say it's the Section 106 board that makes decisions, but is this perhaps something we should be going out to wider discussion about on how this money is used? I'll take Steve. If someone can answer my question, then I'll take Steve Baxter from the Residents Association, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, the carbon fund is a SIL fund rather than a Section 1, am I right, Katie?
No, it comes through the Section 106, it's through the SBD, yeah, Section 106.
Okay, so anyway, and I think we have achieved 4.5 million, haven't we?
Yeah, we've negotiated, so yes, that's correct. Let me just double check the report. Yeah, so that's been secured through Section 106 agreements, that 4.5 million.
It says a total of 1,370,000.
Yeah, it doesn't say that in the report. It doesn't say that in the.
Oh, sorry. Just to clarify, yep. So we've negotiated through the Section 106, but in terms of what's actually been received so far, is the 1 million, the 1,370.
And how are we going to get the rest in?
Beg your pardon?
You say you've negotiated. I'm sorry, I'm perhaps being a bit. You're talking about the fund being worth 4 million, and you've got 1.7 million in. So
that contribution.
Yeah. Or
sorry,
not
yeah. Yeah, so we can secure it through the planning process and the Section 106 agreement that is tied to that approval. But then the contributions are received once the works commence on the site. So it's only once the development is actually commenced that we would receive that contribution.
I think I'll ask another place. I've got Steve Webster. Do you want to unmute yourself, Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Patrick. Katie, one of the actions is in your presentation, heat decarbonisation measures to include a mix of heat pump and district heating systems. Just so I can get my head around that, in the medium to long term, what do you think that's going to look like? What are we talking about here with that?
Is this Steve? Is this in relation to my presentation, or is this perhaps in relation to the energy?
Sorry, the presentation.
I think that would be my presentation. I can touch on that once I start the presentation. Is that okay, Steve?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Katie, another question. You mentioned about developing a comms strategy to engage residents across the borough. You know, residents per se, not just council estate residents, but. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Certainly, from the discussions we're having at RLG, discussions within the, the active resident engagement network across council estates across the borough. You know, as Alid quite rightly pointed out, and I agree, there is a lot of interest across the borough for ordinary residents and citizens in, climate change and addressing the climate crisis. So when you get to the point, when you start that process, whoever do that, can you make contact with the RLG, because we'd certainly like to have the opportunity to input to that and be part of that.
Yeah, thank of course. You. Yeah, of course, we'd welcome that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Councillor Patrick.
Councillor Nicholson, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair.
Have your hand up, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Chair. I think the moment may have passed, and I think it's probably a good idea just to kind of focus on Mary and Rotimi's sort of kind of presentation next, if you want to keep the business moving. It was purely to do with the Section 106 board, but perhaps we can have another conversation in another scrutiny session.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Katie and Alex. That's been really very interesting, and I think I certainly learnt a lot, and I'm sure other members have, and I'm sure it will add to our education for us to ask even more relevant questions next time at the next scrutiny panel. It's Mary and Rotary next.
Yes, I will take the presentation. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. So I've got the presentation up, and my mouse is a bit fast. And the presentation is really just to give a review of the Council's net zero energy strategy in relation to our work for climate change and the approach that we're taking to achieve net zero carbon by 2040. So we've produced a strategy document itself, and that document is for the management of the council assets that aligns with the climate emergency declaration. It identifies the key carbon footprints resulting from our activities and where the council has some influence. We've got the baseline model of the current footprints of our portfolio. And within that document itself, we've identified policy levers and intervention opportunities, which have been modeled with costing and monitoring options to give us a roadmap to 2040. The suggested interventions themselves aim to balance not only the feasibility of implementation, but with the severity of the climate crisis that we know that we're facing. Within that document, we've highlighted the scope of what it covers. So it covers scope 1 and 2 emissions across gas and electricity use in council-owned homes and buildings and fleet of vehicles. It also covers scope 3 emissions across embodied carbon, which would arise from our development, staff travel, as well as borough-wide emissions, especially in homes where we know that we have some influence. And I've put this slide up essentially to talk about, the strategic core areas that we've identified within the strategy. We know that we've got to monitor and track the systems that we own to be able to ensure that we can both measure and manage the changes that we're making and remain flexible to change, especially as technology and information changes in a very fast evolving field. This itself will include better data collection and intelligence. We also know that there is a policy and funding gap that we need to address. And we know that we need to take a fabric first approach, ensuring that energy efficiency is forefront of our strategy, as well as energy efficiency and the renewable energy generation. We also know that we need to move away from gas, and going forward, will be, the strategy itself talks about fuel switching, which we want to start trialing immediately where the opportunity presents itself. And we know that after 2025, gas boilers should only be purchased in exceptional circumstances. So that's a commitment that's made within the policy document itself. We also know that, we need to decarbonize our heat, and a lot of this would be potentially through electrification, and we also need to electrify our fleet. So that would mean that the council needs an electrical infrastructure that is robust and able to cope with this. And we've also identified the power purchase agreements is one of the ways that we want to meet our electricity supply in order to ensure that we can properly add additionality to the national grid itself. We've also know that like I mentioned, embodied carbon is important, but we know it's difficult to reduce. But we've made a bold statement to include this within the strategy as well, because we know that a lot of our residual emissions by 2040 would potentially come from embodied carbon. And this is the pathway that the document itself has highlighted. We know that between now and essentially 2025, a lot of what we're looking to do is to identify the measures that we need to take, where we can start trialing retrofit programs and the fuel switching. We want to start doing that. And I'll talk a bit more in a bit more detail about essentially increasing our retrofit rates, increasing the rates of decarbonization of our heat, and we expect that to continue to ramp up in 2025, taking us up to 2040, which is where we've got our targets. And I've touched very briefly on some of the actions that we know that we need to do to do that in terms of the pathway. So we know that we need to look at the emissions coming from new developments. We know that we need to have a lot of bid-ready projects. I know the finances is a challenge, and we know that what the government is bringing out in terms of some of the funding schemes, where we want to be in a position where we have projects that are ready to kind of take advantage of this funding stream, but also projects that are ready for the markets as well. I talked earlier about data and being ready to take advantage of opportunities. And for us to be able to do that, we need to develop guidance documents, not just for metering, but also monitoring and energy performance as well as capturing things that we consider are core benefits of these measures beyond just carbon and beyond financial metric as well. And those actions themselves includes a mix of, heat pump technology and district heat systems in terms of decarbonizing our heat. When we talk about the heat pump and district heat systems, essentially this is really because we know that the electrification of our heat is how we're going to get to net zero carbon, is one of the ways that we're going to get to net zero carbon. We know that there'll be individual heat pump system. We've taken our hydrogen for now because the market for hydrogen is not well developed. The government itself has released a heat and building strategy where it would make a decision on hydrogen by 2026. But if we're focusing on essentially what's a 20-year plan, we know that we need to start now. And we've taken hydrogen out of the mix. So district heat systems itself, where we've got communal heating systems, they lend themselves to being swapped for renewable technology because they themselves remain technology agnostic. And again, within the GLA hierarchy of it remains one of the top priorities when it comes to heat decarbonization as well. And we know, like I mentioned, we've got to have a low carbon infrastructure. We've got to increase the amounts of solar PV, that we generate, that we install, and electricity that we generate in the borough. We also know that the fabric first approach through the retrofit program is where we need to be. We've identified within the strategy by 2040, we need to have retrofitted 9,000 homes and 206,000 square meters of non-domestic space. And this again is against the backdrop of the different type of building typology that we have. So those are some of the actions that we're taking forward at the moment. And we've also identified within that what's 2040 what is success going to look like for us in 2040. We know that we need to be in a position where we not only understand the cost of doing this work, but also the effectiveness of the technologies that we want to introduce. We know that we need to achieve a retrofit rate. We've put that at 500 homes and 10,000 square meters of non-domestic space per year, together with replacing our EV vehicles and switching our homes from gas to low carbon technology, be it air source heat pumps mainly. Also, we know that we need to be gathering data and monitoring the effectiveness of this. There is also a role for national policy, and there's also a role for collaboration because like many local authorities, we're in the same position. My colleagues earlier mentioned what's happening on the London sphere, and we're very engaged with that, even from a retrofit perspective as well. So we know that there is an opportunity for us to not just collaborate, but also build capacity across London. The next slide is so small, I'd have to apologize for that. But what this slide is really touching on is just the implementation plan. So we've got a roadmap to 2040, and what we've said is between 2020 and 21, which is almost the end of this year, we want to explore all of the actions that we need to do, a lot of which I've touched on earlier, and I'll touch on in a bit more detail later. Between now and 2023, we need to be in a position where we're starting to adopt those actions. So we've done the exploration, but now it's time for us to actually start taking some actions. And when you look down, that pathway, you'd see that the community engagement pretty much starts in that adoption phase, together with the PPA, our piloting programs, identifying which projects we need to include in our retrofit plan, which vehicles we need to switch, and what our PV program would look like. A lot of that activity we expect to happen between 2021 all the way to 2023. By the time we get to 2023, we want these plans to be integrated. We want to start fully integrating them into BAU, in terms of how we do things and how we develop programs themselves. We see ourselves reaching a peak rollout by 2027, between 2027 and 2030, which then links back to that delivery pathway that I mentioned earlier, where you can see a massive drop in our emissions themselves. This essentially is how we think we're going to get to 2040. But like I mentioned, we've already started a lot of this work. We're not starting from scratch. We've developed, the energy master plan. Within that, we know the areas where we want to develop district heat schemes. We've got our asset management strategy, which at the moment is to EPCC. But we know that as part of the London retrofit plan, we need to be targeting EPCB. But beyond EPCs as well is also the opportunities just for demand reduction across our homes and our non-domestic assets as well. I'm going to just move on very swiftly because of time, because this is in the slide, because I want to touch on what we consider some of the risks and challenges themselves as well. I've mentioned the complex portfolio that we have, the different type of building typologies and the tenures, as well as the readiness of the technology that we know that we need to use, in terms of the readiness of them, and the readiness for us to be able to adopt that en masse, as well as the fact that we do have assets that are in good operational condition that we wouldn't want to start to retrofit until there is the need for that. And how do we balance that with the need for carbon reduction and net zero? Again, there is the funding challenge, and the fact that we'd also have a challenge around expedition versus savings, where there's some homes where we've got influence over, but we know that the savings that will be realized from that, it's not coming directly to the council. So that those are things that affect the funding model themselves. But we also know that there's some work that we need to do around our user awareness. Heat pumps themselves will have a visual impact in places, and we need to understand how we want to take that messaging forward. I've talked about what we would need to do in terms of the electricity grid, because there will be grid limitations that would have some impact, but we want to be in front of that to identify the areas where we know that we would need grid strengthening and start to work with people like UKPN around that. But also another risk is the coordinated approach, that we would need to scope projects and deliver that, and not just deliver it, but accelerate the rollout of these low carbon projects, both across housing and our corporate properties as well. So what's the impact of this for us? As a local authority, we know that when potentially increase in energy cost is likely to be associated with the electrification of heat. But what the approach that we intend to take is to communicate the overall benefits of that, There is a school of thought also that suggests in itself that, you know, low carbon technology itself brings reduced emissions, and there is a compelling evidence on the financial benefits of energy efficiency, retrofitting, and low carbon technology. But we know that that needs to be balanced with potential and perceived high costs in itself. And I think some of this is being answered through some of policy intervention. I think I mentioned the heat and building strategy earlier, where the government has started to commit to not only making heat pump technology cheaper, but also taking away some of the levies on electricity to ensure that, and putting that on gas to address some of that disparity. Again, one of the impact itself is we know that engaging with residents, it will be difficult unless they can see how this fits into the country's wider nation net zero ambitions itself as well. And against that, you know, there is a communication plan. As mentioned earlier, the net zero strategy itself links into Hackney's climate action plan. And there's pockets of opportunities that we've identified within the roadmap to developing our climate action plan, where we intend to communicate this with our residents and engage with them as well. And I won't touch too much on this because my colleagues have done justice to it earlier, but there is also the internal governance structure that we've got in place to help us ensure that the actions that we're coming up with is not only disseminated, but it's, you know, it's sound, and that we have the opportunity to escalate issues where necessary. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you. Stop sharing.
I wonder, before I take questions, I wonder if Councillor Coburn, as the Cabinet member, wants to say a few words to us on what the Council's doing. I mean, Mary's been very eloquent, but perhaps you could mention your press release today about the Green Homes Grant and anything else that's going on. I know yourself and the Mayor are going to COP. Perhaps you could tell us what you hope to achieve for the council and for London councils there.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick, and thanks for inviting us. I think it's a very important, yeah, it's very timely for this to come to scrutiny ahead of COP26. And I think Mary very eloquently sort of set out what the council's energy strategy seeks to achieve, particularly in helping us achieve our net zero ambitions by 2040. I think, you know, if we are going to achieve our targets of net 40 of 2040, there's a number of things that the council needs to do, and obviously we're doing a number of things, from our sustainable transport policies to waste management to energy and everything else that we are doing. The energy strategy is obviously a huge part of that, because we know that as a council we obviously directly control, you know, we have 5% of emissions of sort of related to the council directly, about 23% sort of indirect control, and then the rest of it is sort of you know, borough-wide emissions. And obviously a large part of that is, you know, how people sort of go about their day-to-day lives, you know, obviously our buildings that we spoke about, obviously our energy that's emitted as well, and obviously that's going to be incredibly sort of important going forward. So, you know, just today we obviously relaunched the second phase of the Green Homes programme, which helps support our residents to, you know, reduce their lower energy bills. I keep talking about the green dividend, and I think that's really important to highlight, which is about how do we create green jobs across our borough, help support our residents to reduce their energy bills, and then obviously ultimately help tackle the climate crisis, have better air quality. And obviously, you know, programs like the Green Homes programme not only obviously help support our residents who need that support to shift towards solar energy or replacing the gas boilers, and obviously saving money on their energy bills, but it's also about, you know, and I'm sure Councillor Nicholson, this is something that we've been, you know, just speaking about for years, around the inclusive economy strategy, around creating jobs. It's how do you sort of like kickstart those green jobs, and how do you excite people across Hackney? Just a bit like when the tech sector and the creative sector was first coming into Hackney, and people were really looking forward to sort of the job opportunities that were being created. And I think we need to recreate that excitement with the shift to sort of a greener economy. And obviously, you know, we just need to make sure that we're doing it in a just transition way. And obviously we've seen really good examples. I was at the Stoke Newington secondary school a couple of weeks ago, together with the mayor, where you had a great partnership between Stoke Newington School, Stokey, a local energy company, supported by GLA, and obviously the council too, where you saw the installation of solar panels, which will obviously help power the school, which is, and we know that that was an ambition of the young kids there who go to school there. But it's a great partnership, and that's the sort of partnership that needs to happen. I think, the message that's coming out clearly from today, and obviously there's going to be a lot of work to be done around sort of the financing models. We know that there is big challenges around the financials, but a lot of if we are going to be able to reach sort of the targets that we are setting for ourselves, we are going to have to rely on sort of a lot of those partnerships that need to take place between both sorts of private sectors and obviously public sector to sort of see us move towards that right place. I think one of the things that I'm really keen to do is obviously to see how we fit all of this within the wider climate action plan, and obviously particularly as we go into COP, and obviously I know London Council's is doing a lot of work around that, around the 7 different areas. Alid and Katie spoke about the low carbon development work. We obviously spoke about the energy work. There's lots of work being done around active travel, transport, and hopefully as we move to, I believe the date where we want to sort of have a set climate action plan is next year in the autumn. We've got a climate citizens assembly taking place in January. We just had our green recovery event last week where we heard from residents as well. I think public engagement is incredibly important, and I know that the commission and knowing the members on the commission are incredibly important, that we do this working in conversation with people. So we're not doing it to them, but actually working with them. And we know that obviously social justice is obviously underpins everything that we are doing around our race to net zero as well. So hopefully, you would have heard obviously everything that we're doing around net zero. There's going to be a whole process of, trialing out new programs, understanding new financing models, obviously that partnership with with various different sectors. And then hopefully we can move on forward from there. But I think it's really important that we have a strong scrutiny process as part of that process, and that's why I think it's important that we are here today. But I'll leave it at that because I know there's going to be lots of questions, and I know you've all heard me bang on about it quite a lot over the past couple of months. So thank you very much, Fred Chair, for having us, and thank you I should also say a massive thank you to both Rotimi and to Mary. I want to say, sorry, Mary, I'm gonna embarrass you here a little bit, but Mary's going to be leaving us in November, unfortunately. She's done tremendous work to get the net zero energy strategy together. By no means it's an easy piece of strategy to put together, and I know how hard she's worked since I've taken my role. So I just want to put my thanks on the record to you, Mary, and the team, and for Rotimi and everyone who's been involved in putting together the net zero energy strategy.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Councillor Stopps, did you want to come in?
I'll go after the other members.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see Councillor Rathbone.
And Councillor Joseph as well.
And the board.
Sorry, I'll take Councillor Rathbone, Councillor Joseph, then Councillor Stopps.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple of questions. One is in the scoping, it mentions unseen energy, and I wondered if that could be a bit more detailed. So it's rather mysterious, and it is a rather large amount, and how that might be tackled. And then secondly, I suppose it's also a personal issue for me, is I have a gas boiler, and I'm seeing that gas boilers are going to be phased out. And I'm wondering, is this applying to private householders and landlords? How exactly is that going to work? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'll tackle the first question about unseen energy first. With the unseen energy, what we wanted to do when we did the scoping was make sure we leave no stone unturned, and especially around borough-wide emissions where we don't have the data for that, but there is things like LEGI data, which kind of highlights maybe some of the emissions across like private owned homes. Those is what we've kind of put on the unseen energy. In terms of the gas boilers themselves, this within itself, it's a national policy because the route map to net zero would necessitate that we move away from fossil fuel technology. And when you look at the carbon intensity of gas and electricity, I mean, there was a time in the past where, you know, gas had a lower carbon intensity than electricity, and that's now obviously changed now. So every policy direction is pushing us in the direction of going towards replacing gas with heat pump technology. And that's where government intervention is coming in. I think I banged on about the heat and building strategy. Probably this is the third time in this meeting, because I think it's a very important piece of strategy, mainly because it's highlighting some of what the government's going to do to help, not just us as a local authority, but individual members of the public to actually have access to low-cost heat pump technology, and also taking those levies away from electricity to make sure that the cost parity between, you know, an electricity heated building and a gas heated building is not too much. But having said that, there is a lot of, you know, hurdles that we need to climb over to get there. There is the fabric retrofit of our buildings themselves. So it's not a, you know, and I think that's probably the worry for potentially individual residents. Because where you haven't retrofitted your home fabric first, it's not a like for like replacement. And that's the work that we need to do as a local authority, to not just engage with our residents, but also educate them. And that's where the Green Homes program itself that Councillor Met was talking about comes into place as well, because we want to be able to use that route to do that. We've also done at least one program in itself where we've been able to take one property from, you know, an EPCE to an EPCA, using this range of measures and this range of, you know, finance grant schemes as well. So it's a long road, but that's the future, you know, as I see it from policy.
Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Mary, for the report. So just 2 points I wanted to make. Just again on the scoping, I can see that scope 1 and 3 predicted, or we hope that they are going to really quite massively decrease. And I can understand possibly the national rules around what vehicles people can drive and so on could lead to such a decrease from 17,000 to 190. But the embodied carbon, if we're predicting or hoping that it's going to go down by 2/3, then surely that has to be led by there being just less development. Surely that has to be the step that's taken. Otherwise, I just don't see how any of the smaller strategies are going to lead to such a decrease in the embodied carbon. And if I may, the other point I just wanted to highlight was the electricity as a, you know, it's generated by fossil fuels, so it's not ideal. And I feel that the electric cars as well, there's a lot of concerns around the lithium batteries and the components in those, you know, being mined in countries, poor countries. So I just wanted, yeah, I mean, I do think that's quite a concern, and I know that hydrogen is obviously at a very early stage, but I would really like us to look into those kinds of energies, because I don't necessarily think that electricity is hugely better than the traditional forms of power, really. So yeah, interested in your views on that point.
I can comment, and I'm sure some of my colleagues may want to comment on that as well. Where it comes to the embodied carbon in terms of the reduction of that by 2040, I think we know that it would need to be a mix of approaches. And because the strategy, again, it's a strategy document and it's forward-looking, and it has highlighted the interventions that we would need to consider to get there. The actual actions themselves will then shape, you know, how we get there. And we do know that it needs to be a mix of those interventions in terms of, you know, maybe less buildings, more buildings, you know, innovation in building technology, some of which has been highlighted today, is how we think we're going to get there. In terms of the, hydrogen, there is a big piece of work that's being done at the moment to identify if hydrogen can actually contribute to the decarbonization of heating homes. And there's nothing in, in terms of what's emerging out of, policy as well as technical studies that suggest that hydrogen will be able to meet that by 2050. Even the government itself has seen the role of hydrogen after 2050. And if we're going to create a plan, a strategy document that looks forward to 2040, we don't see how we can use that as a credible solution in areas where, especially, in rural areas where they're on what's the word? On coal. Coal is not the word, wood. That those are potentially more likely to benefit from hydrogen. The government itself is coming up with hydrogen zones in some of these areas. So those are areas where hydrogen technology will be trialed. For an inner London, borough like ourselves, it's still further into the future. But we remain flexible. The action plan that we have is really just for the next 3 years. And if technology changes, by all means, we'll be adopting that.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Mary. I think just to add, I think it's a case of where we are at in terms of technology development around hydrogen and the supply chain. I think from what we know now, I think it's relatively less developed compared to electrification.
That's right.
So I think, as Mary alluded to, we're always going to be flexible about how we proceed with this. We're always watching what's going on in the market with regards to any development in this area. So the plan will be, as and when we are aware of development in hydrogen technology, obviously we'll be looking at that as well.
So, Vincent.
Yeah, just to highlight, if I could, my experience with retrofit. My experience with retrofit a few years ago, the Pembury Estate, a beautiful red brick 1930s estate, in desperately of improving its thermal efficiency. Peabody were offered by the gas company the opportunity to completely transform that estate from a red brick building to a white rendered building. Now, you can imagine that went down like a lead balloon to those of us that care about our built environment. So we've got to be really careful about some of this stuff, because we're going to just get the boring, bloody stuff. You can imagine retrofitting. We need a bit of innovation in terms of how they're going to do this sort of stuff. I mean, they basically wanted the cheapest energy efficiency for the maximum bang for their buck. And the maximum bang for their buck was to come into a council estate and smear it with render. And so be careful with what you're asking for.
Thank you. Councillor Chauhan.
Two questions. Am I on?
Councillor Stocks, turn yours.
Two questions. First one is, how do you intend to engage with non-Hackney council organisations like housing associations for some of your ideas for reducing CO2?
Sorry, I don't know if it's on.
No.
Did everyone get that?
Got the question, yeah.
Fine.
Maybe try a different one and see.
So try this.
It's always the technology.
Next one, try this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds
Is
good.
the first question gone through, or should I say?
Yeah, I think that went through.
And the second question is like, it's more a planning issue. Maybe Katie or Vincent can answer this. As you're aware, there's a big cladding scandal in Hackney, like loads of buildings need their cladding replaced. Will there be an opportunity for it to be, for planning, to insist that it be kind of like improve energy efficiency in the building and also carbon neutral? Thank you.
I've got Councillor Rat, and then I'll bring the, perhaps you can then answer some of the questions.
Okay, thank you. I've got two questions really. One is about electricity. Clearly there's a heavy reliance on electricity here for the future as we're envisaging this. And whilst we're moving away from producing electricity with fossil fuels, with more solar and more wind generated electricity, there's clearly a limit to how much of that Hackney can produce. We're very, very limited in whatever electricity we can produce, and we're relying on outside sources. And it does seem to me that increasingly nuclear energy is going to be seen as, in inverted commas, clean. I personally don't see nuclear energy as clean at all. In fact, in many ways, it's the worst possible pollutant because it pollutes forever into the future. And also, the other danger with nuclear energy is that it relies on very large water sources and tends to be sited next to the sea, which, as we know, is rising because of climate change. So I see lots of dangers with relying heavily on nuclear power into the future. And I wonder whether, as a council, we are in a position to take an anti-nuclear power position whilst relying so heavily, as we seem to be here, on electricity into the future to solve our zero emissions policy. The other question, I was just looking at the report on the table, which says benefits and risks of different heat sources. The district heat source is absolutely, seems to be the most positive, although possibly the most expensive. And I just wondered if you could talk us through, since it does seem to be such a positive way forward, a little bit more about how we might use district heat, both for the council's own buildings, but also for other buildings too. I mean, is it possible that we could have whole private streets looking at district heat in the future? Sorry, those are a bit long, those questions.
Thank you. I'm happy. I'm not sure if I can take the question on the nuclear side.
I'll take that.
I think, yeah, go on. But I'm very happy to take the question on the district energy. I mentioned earlier about our energy master plan. Within the energy master plan, we've pretty much mapped out the whole of Hackney and identified 10 clusters where we know that, where the potential to use other sources of, low carbon is, from ground source heat pumps to air source heat pump. The role of district energy we see is not only enabling, because especially where we have regeneration projects, which provides us with the critical mass to develop district heat schemes, we want to be able to use that to also decarbonize existing buildings as well. One of those kind of opportunities that we're looking at is with the Woodbury Down Woodbury Down development, where through planning, it does need to have a district energy scheme, but we're looking at opportunities not just to use that, the district energy scheme that will be in Woodbury Down to actually decarbonize neighboring areas. So taking that heat down to somewhere like Stamford Hill and decarbonizing areas around the Woodbury Down Energy Center, but also looking at, bringing in energy from waste from, our neighboring boroughs as well down that. So there is a whole, low carbon infrastructure that we're starting to think about as a local authority. And we know that the opportunity is really where we can use our new build schemes to actually use that, that critical mass that it gives us to develop these schemes, but also then look at how we can use that to decarbonize our existing, estates around that as well. So that's a plan that we've started to pretty much put in motion.
Yeah, just to comment to the electricity nuclear development issue. I think one of the things that's been highlighted in our strategy, as you alluded to, in terms of how we decarbonize heat, obviously electrification is part of that interventions. And I think what we're doing is, in terms of our current purchase of electricity from our suppliers, we have what you call RIGO certificated electricity that we purchase in our contract. I think the issue with that, as you rightly said, is that even though it's certificated that it's green electricity, there's no transparency in terms of whether that is from a solar farm or whether from nuclear generation. So what we want to do in terms of fixing that, again, we set that out in the strategies that we want to go into what you call a PPA, power purchasing agreement, where we go to a solar farm or wind generation organization and say, actually, we want to enter into a 15-year, 20-year contract that allow them to actually carry out proper generation using some of the technologies that are out there in the market as opposed to nuclear. So that's the approach we want to take to tackle that particular issue. So what I can say as head of procurement for the council is that in terms of that procurement, ensuring that the negotiation that we're going to undertake will ensure that the product that is coming through our supply doesn't come from, it will be clear in terms of our specification that we're not looking for product that's coming from nuclear generation, but actually from wind farm or solar generation or some other what you call real renewable generation. That's our approach in terms of tackling that concern that you highlighted.
Thank you very much. That's really encouraging, actually. Thank you. Could I just ask about the district heat again? I mean, I see that what you're saying is that you're looking at strategies for new builds and council properties, but obviously there are a lot of areas in Hackney which don't fall into those categories.
That's right.
Are we moving to think about those areas at all for district heat, or is it too early for that still?
No, it's not too early. Those clusters that I mentioned have identified those areas as well as those buildings, some of which are non-domestic buildings. For instance, within Hackney Central, most of the buildings, that in itself is a heat cluster as identified, and most of the buildings are, our own corporate assets and less, domestic estates. So the plan does cover not just, domestic properties, but also non-domestic properties. We do know that the council itself has a role in enabling district heat for the whole of the borough. And what we do have is what we call a district energy working group as well. And within this group, we're working on pretty much a findings paper, which would highlight some of what the council needs to do to prepare itself in that role and facilitate, the development of district energy schemes that, developers can connect to as well.
If I may, I was just going to...
Anybody answer Councillor Chosen's question, which was before Councillor Rout, so perhaps you could finish answering Councillor Rout and then answer Councillor Chosen's question.
So
would it be possible to hear the questions again,
Yeah.
Chair? It was just difficult with the microphone feedback.
Yeah.
Would you want to finish, Councillor Rout? Is there any more? Sorry, if you finish speaking to Councillor Rout, then I'll ask Councillor Chosen.
I think they're finished. I was just going to wish Mary well in her new job, wherever it is. And of course, I'm really curious to know where it is. That's not really a question for this committee.
No. Councillor Chosen, they didn't hear you with the mics playing up. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'll just ask it again. It's really two questions. How do you intend to engage with non-Hackney Council organisations like housing associations to follow some of your ideas for reducing CO2 and energy efficiency? And the second question, I think it's for Katie and Vincent. As you're aware, lots of buildings in Hackney are going to need their cladding replaced. Is there an opportunity there for insisting that they put cladding on that's energy efficient and reduces CO2?
I'm happy to take the question on RPs. I'm sure Kate and Aled will probably take the planning. We've already, through our housing colleagues, started to engage with RPs. over the course of this year, we actually had a series of events where we engaged with them, introducing our net zero energy strategy to them, and also highlighting good practice guide between both type of organizations. And that's being taken through our housing policy and strategy team. And we see that as one of the ways that we would continue to engage with them. What we're also producing is a good practice guide for them as well, pretty much highlighting what the council, what net zero looks like for Hackney as a whole. So that work in itself is in development through, both ourselves and our housing policy colleagues. Katie.
I was just going to add to that in terms of the engagement side of things. Yeah, it's obviously very important, and I think that's why it's identified through the low carbon action plan work that we're looking to. As a key action is to develop that engagement program and that engagement strategy. So that will look at residents, businesses, organisations as part of that. So that's an emerging piece of work, but it's really important one, and we do see communities being at the heart of these discussions and ensuring that we achieve buy-in. And in terms of developing our local plan and area-based plans, obviously community engagement is fundamental and critical to the success of those developing that policy. And we have sort of statutory consultation which we undertake with communities and organisations and developers and landowners as part of that process. So they have been involved in the preparation of the local plan, so should be aware of the policies that have come forward as part of that. But it's a really important point.
I think on the second question, in terms of recladding and the role of planning, whilst it might require planning permission, it also requires building regs. So it's the building regs regime which will have the control on the energy efficiency and the installation of those buildings. And there's quite a lot of already existing building regs, regulations, which they need to comply with. And I think there are some more on the horizon as well. So it's more to building control, which will have more control on the energy efficiency of new cladding than planning.
So I've got a question, Vince, I'll take you back in a minute. Yeah, I've got a question. I'd like to ask about solar panels. They seem to be quite the future, and there was the Bannister House project, and then I know the government cut the feed-in tariff, and people stopped putting them in because they weren't economical. I was very pleased to hear this from Councillor Coburn that Stonehenge School has put them in with the local energy supplier. I just wondered how we saw the future of solar panels. I mean, I would have thought that even if they're not, I don't know how much they cost and how much it costs to, whether they save people money in the long run. I was reading some stuff on the internet last night that talked about homeowners getting their money back in 10 years. It looked quite a long time before you get a saving. But I was wondering for the council though, what the savings would be, and also it would stop us having to rely on the energy network, and it would make us more self-sufficient in many ways. And whether we're thinking of using solar panels when we're discussing retrofit next time, but what we're encouraging people, whether we're encouraging people to use solar panels at all, even if not for all of their energy supplies. I wonder if they can supply some of their energy supplies, and especially as they do take people off the network and don't rely on trying to make sure that our electricity doesn't come from fossil fuels. So I just wondered about the role of solar panels for the future.
I'll take that, Councillor Patrick. I mean, you rightly pointed that out in terms of the government taking out the feed-in tariff about 2 or 3 years ago now, which makes solar panel less financially viable in some cases. But I think solar panel installation is an integral part of what we need to do to achieve net zero. I think we clearly set that out also in the strategy. And it's also a key part of what Hackney Light and Power is obviously leading on. You may have seen some of the Councillor Coban has put out there, we've done quite a few installations last year, this year, on some of the corporate council buildings. So where there of years is that we're looking at the wider residential buildings. So we've done quite a lot of feasibility study work, the council existing roof spaces for the installation of solar panel. So that work is at a very, very early stage at the moment, but it's part of it's an integral part of what we want to do in terms of generating our own electricity. Obviously, that is going to be a fraction of what we actually need from the grid. But like I said earlier, in answering Councillor Rath's question, what we want to do is to also look to enter into a power purchasing arrangement with organizations who are able to use, who are able to go offshore to create a solar panel farm, for example, or use a wind solar and wind generation to be able to secure all our electricity in the future. So that's part of the work we're doing in terms of the larger piece. But I think, as you said, solar panel installation and generating electricity via solar panel is an integral part of the work we're going to be doing in terms of achieving net zero.
Thank you. Councillor Stocks, did you have a question?
Just a comment really to follow on from Alan in response to AJ. One of the muddles of Grenfell was I remember people were saying, oh, the planning committee were only concerned about what it looked like. Post Grenfell, there was a complaint that the planning process had only worried about what the building looked like. And the reason that is exactly what Alan said, that is their remit, and this is a building control issue. The second point is that for some reason the Mayor of London decided to put something in the London plan about fire. God knows why. We haven't got any fire experts within the planning process, and that muddies the water further. So we have to be careful about, some of these issues around cladding and what planning can do. Exactly as Alan said.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to come in? If not, I'll take a comfort break. Okay. If we can come back in 5 minutes, please.
Closing it.
Thank you, everybody.
Are you closing this item?
Closing the recycling section.
Huh?
We're closing this section.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'm closing this section since nobody else wants to come in, unless Councillor Coburn wants to say anything more. No. Okay, I'm going to close this section now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Ian.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Do you want to start now?
We're live.
Yes.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody, to the second part. Of the 14th of July, that's quite a long while ago. Can we agree the minutes? Is there any actions arising from them?
There's one action on the cover sheet.
Can I have an agreement to the minutes?
Yes, agreed.
Thank you. I thought I saw something about.
Could I just wonder, yeah, I mean, it's not that the minutes are wrong on the police meeting at all, but I just wonder if there's any way that we could sort of recognise that whole conversation has sort of feeds into the conversation which is ongoing at the moment with the police about how seriously they treat members of the public, victims of crime that they're dealing with, and their attitude of defensiveness and what have you. I just wonder if there's any way that we could note that since that meeting took place, there have been significant developments in that area. Do you know what I mean? Because there's part of me which looks at those minutes now and thinks they look a bit naive, actually. And we were doing our best at the time, and obviously trying to sort of pick up on the zeitgeist of the time. But if we were having that meeting even a month later, what took place, there have been significant developments in that area. Do you know what I mean? Because there's part of me which looks at those a few days after the report into Daniel, I've forgotten his second name, after the murder of the guy who got the axe in the head, which had found that there was institutional corruption within the police, is what they called it. And we didn't explore that as much as we would have done if things had moved on. And maybe that minutes aren't the place to do this, because, as I say, it's a record of what happened historically. But it's almost like if there could be an informative at the end of the minutes to say something about how, you know, that some of the issues that we touched on in that meeting have since developed and become much more significant for the police, and you know, they need to take account of that. That would be quite good.
I'm not sure we can do that, but I know what you're saying. We haven't got a session with the police coming up. I was hoping, because it takes up quite a lot of time, and I sometimes feel we're banging our heads against a brick wall with some of the responses we get. Although it's quite interesting to see Sal Needham on a call the other day from the regional director of the IOPC, talking about some of the work they were doing. So, but I certainly think that we should have them back at the first meeting of the next municipal year, after the first meeting after the election, to have them back, because that would have given them some time to do some work on the mayor's plan and restructure themselves and take on board some of our comments.
I got the impression at that meeting that you know, as I say, this report had only just come out, a very long inquiry that found them that there was institutional corruption, and at the time I think there was a certain amount of debate and discussion about what that meant, and you know, what it seems to be starting to mean is that there's you know, a culture of institutional collective defensiveness and
we've seen that.
yeah, and in some places, you know.
I mean, we've seen that, well, their so-called apology today to the
Exactly. Yeah.
mother
I
of
just,
those two
yeah.
sisters who basically rejected their apology. I do think you've got a point. I'm not sure this is the correct place to take it forward, but I'm happy to have a discussion with you outside this meeting, and perhaps with Councillor Virginia Thomas, the Cabinet member, and it may be there may be a better forum to take up some of that concerns. Maybe Councillor Virginia Thomas could facilitate a meeting with the police outside of through her office rather than the scrutiny meeting, because we don't have any time this year. But yeah, I take your point, Councillor Rout. So,
okay. I just don't want our residents to feel that we're going easy on them, I suppose. You know, and that we do share the same concerns, and you know, the Scrutiny Commission is obviously a place to try and take that forward. And I think, you know, to be perfectly honest, I think we were a bit fobbed off in some of the answers that they gave us at that meeting. And yeah, I'm not sure if we could get any further with things, but it seems to me that we do have to keep the pressure up. There is more pressure that's been applied since that meeting, and I think as a Scrutiny Commission, we've got to try and keep the pressure up too. That's all.
I agree entirely, but I don't like. Well, yeah, if you. We've only got so many scrutiny meetings a year, and there's so much to cover. But I agree that we need to keep the pressure up on the police, and I'm sure Councillor Virginia Thomas does that in all her meetings with the police and the borough commander and others. And of course, we've now got Sem Mahima at the GLA, and I'm sure she's using her offices there. Not as a Hackney councillor, but to put pressure on the place as well. But I don't think anyone's forgotten the work we did and that we need to carry on. But if we can perhaps move on to the work programme for the rest of this year.
Chair, sorry for interrupting. Is this part of the meeting is still recording?
Yes. Sorry, Councillor Rosen, I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I said, is it still being recorded, this part of the meeting?
Yes.
Yep, okay.
Yes, we're still being recorded. This is part of a public meeting. So the next thing we've got on the work programme is the next meeting is a continuation of our work on climate change, and it's about retrofitting of buildings, which fits in with, which is not a follow-up, which is fitting from today's work. So we'll be looking at the retrofitting of both our internal council buildings, so our non-residential buildings, our leisure centres, our offices, and also our council properties, the ones that show residential properties as well. I mean, we've heard some of the work that's going on today. There'll be a report. They will tell us about some of the work they're planning to do at Stoke Newton Library, which is having major works done to it to stop it falling down, and look at the process of retrofitting. I also think when we look at retrofitting, and we mentioned it today, but we also have to look at the effect of retrofitting and what is going to go in there in the sense of heating, and how it's going to be, whether it's going to be carbon neutral or and if so, will it have to also keep bills down, because and make sure that it is, whatever is put in is adequate for our climate. I know climate temperatures are meant to be rising, but having done some homework on air source pumps. They don't work very effectively when it around zero, the temperature drops to 0 or below. And the last thing we want is for certainly our residents who live in council properties where we've put heat pumps in, to have to find alternate alternate sources of heating if it gets really cold. If that means that they have to pay more money for that heating. So they'd be using more heating when it's very cold anyway, and then to have to use external sources to top up. So that's something I think we will need to make sure that we ask about, and also how all this retrofitting is going to take place. I mean, as we've heard today, one of the major issues is the money. The council, in these terms of austerity, doesn't have the money to do all this work itself, and so far the government hasn't really come up with very much money. I think there's been some money announced, but not enough, certainly to do all the work that needs to do, and also some of the technology still needs to be developed. I mean, as Councillor Rathbone said earlier about the gas boilers, you're not going to put new gas boilers in after 2025, but they talked about hydrogen boilers, but hydrogen boilers haven't come on stream yet. They're still developing them. So I think we'll have to look at the technology very closely as well and see what's going to happen, as well as the issues that Councillor Stott mentioned to preserve buildings. We don't want buildings just to look like to look nice now, and if they're going to be energy efficient, to make them look non-nice. I think there is an element of that in keeping buildings that historically have looked a certain way and not having them to change. But I think they're all questions that we can ask on the 8th. On the 13th, we've got electric charging points. The council's got massive plans for putting in electric charging points across the borough and across our estate. And I think there's lots of questions that we can ask about that. Where are the charging points going? How much are they going to cost? And also where exactly they're going to go. I know there's an issue elsewhere in the borough at the moment where there's a pilot and the council wants to put a lot of charging points in the same street. And there's lots of arguments from the residents about the charging points taking up parking spaces, their parking spaces, because they won't be able to charge there. So I think there's some questions to ask officers. Then on the 17th of January, we've got the fire safety housing services are coming back to update us with work they've been doing on fire safety. And also the private sector housing are coming back. We had the private sector housing and the housing licensing scheme a few years ago, and they're coming back to update us about the licensing scheme and give us any evidence they've got for increasing the licensing scheme to cover other parts of the borough. And also at that meeting, if there is time, anything that doesn't get taken at the other 3 meetings on this carbon work we're doing, we can perhaps pick up at that meeting. On the meeting of the 24th of February, we've agreed to have a joint meeting with Children and Young People Scrutiny to look at the housing options for our care leavers who we are the corporate parent for. And as I say, corporate parent means we're all responsible for our care leavers, not only children's services, and that's something I think we forget sometimes across the council, and everything to do with children care and care leavers is often left up to children's services. And on our last meeting of the year, which is quite early due to us going into further because the council elections, is an overview of the leisure facilities in the borough. We've been looking at the costs and access to leisure facilities, prices, how they compare. how people get access to leisure facilities, what concessions are available, how do people know about them, and the differences in prices to our leisure facilities. Most of our sports centres, including the New Britannia, charge the same, but there's different charges for the London Fields Lido and the open air swimming at Woodbury Down Water Centre. So there is lots of things we need to look. There's things we need to look at, and I'm sure there might be other things that may have come up that we might have to slot in as well. Councillor Out.
Yeah, I was just wondering on that front. Most of our leisure services are run by one company, Better Leisure, which I think started out originally as part of Greenwich Borough as their, leisure facilities arm, and eventually was privatised, and that now is quite a big company which takes on lots of leisure provision across London and beyond. Are we going to be asking them in at all to talk? Because I do think that they are responsible for delivering the service, and it would be relevant to have them as part of the discussion.
Yeah, we can ask them. I don't think they're actually a private company. I think they're actually, officially a workers' cooperative or something like that. They're not actually a private.
Yeah, I think they are with charity involvement as well. They have, yeah.
They're charity.
They're a charity, yeah. They're not a private company as such. I don't know quite how they operate, but yeah, that's a good idea. We can ask them to come, but they run the centres, and I'm sure there's questions about the centres. But it's the council that set the fees and charges, and are responsible to a large extent for promoting the services. But we can ask them to come as well. I'm sure we could have questions about them about the running of the centre, but they are a contractor in many ways, and we do set the terms and conditions of how they run the centres, but we can ask them to come. That's not a problem.
There are certain things, for example, I speak to some extent of somebody who's just had an experience of this. Their website is a very, very large website which encompasses lots of different areas, lots of different leisure centres. So that website is for Hackney residents, the interface with our leisure centres. And, personally, I don't think it's a particularly brilliant website. So that really does impact on the customer service that our people get. So I do think it's really relevant to have them in.
Yeah,
and
that's fine.
Something that Councillor Joseph may want to mention, I don't know. I know there's something.
Joseph's got her hand up.
Okay. I'll let her say what I think she's going to say, and if she doesn't, I'll say it for her.
No, thank you, Councillor Rick.
Could you use your mic, Councillor Joseph?
Yes. I have become quite concerned by the number of shops and facilities in the borough that are no longer taking cash. This is quite a big issue, especially in Victoria Wood, and the Better Leisure Centres don't take cash. It all has to be booked online, and even at the Britannia over the summer, their cafe was not accepting any cash at all. So obviously that, for a lot of people that need to use cash, older people or people without much money, young children,
that's important.
they were
You're
really
right.
excluded. So
I
would really welcome getting them in.
Yeah,
and even if we could try and look at, I don't know if this is the right place to look at it, but to look at just in general the borough, have an item on how many places are accepting cash.
I don't think that comes under us, but it's a good point. I think it might come, I don't know if it's coming SMEG skills. Of that, why they're not taking cash, and it may be something to raise with Councillor Kennedy as the cabinet member. I don't know whether he's aware or not, but we can send a note to Councillor Kennedy saying that it's come up, and is he aware of that? Because you're right, it is an important issue for lots of people. There seems to be some places still that don't want that only take cash, and some places I've come across that only take cards.
They need to take both, really.
Yeah,
Because
I was quite surprised. It wasn't in Hackney. I can't remember where it was. It was at, I think it was on one of my holidays at quite an marketplace. Was only taking cash.
surprising sometimes the places.
Yeah. But you have to walk around now with both cash and card because you never know who wants what these days. But you're right. Society, I think I read recently that society in the last 18 months has moved 10 years in terms of cashlessness.
Yeah.
I think we're probably one of the most advanced countries where we've moved to a cashless society.
But there's been no consensus on it. No one's agreed.
No.
And,
I mean, we're losing cash machines as well.
That's
ATMs.
right. That's right.
And interestingly as well, our markets now, most market traders can use the settle or some form of it where you can just tap the card.
And of course, we've just invested £1 million in the road, so they can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But then market traders are online as well. So many things are
And
the
general system is going into the credit cards, not the cash, within 5-10 years time. And then they don't want us to use the cash. But about the sports centers, I had a casework about from the retired elderly people. They were considering about the membership fee. It was, they say it's a bit high for us, and I pass it to mayor office to respond it. And then so that would be great if you told to them for some people over 70, 75s, because they feel like more socialized in there. Also, they feel mentally they feel much better, but they say the fee of the membership is too high. We can maybe talk about it. I don't know if it's related.
Yeah, well, we're looking at fees and charges, so you can certainly raise that, Councillor at the day. Yeah, that's one of the things we're looking at, fees and charges, so you can actually raise that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether lots of people are aware. I mean, I think if you're over 60, you get free swimming in the borough, in all of the leisure centres except the Lido and the Open and the Woodbury Dam.
Yeah, we need to look into it. I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
That's policy, I can assure you. But your Councillor Rat's right about their website. I was trying to find out about changing rooms and gave up looking for information about changing rooms during the summer, whether they were open or shut or whatever, because I was told that it kept saying you had to turn up for a swim ready, but, which is fine. But I wasn't sure how you got changed again afterwards. I mean, going home in wet clothes didn't appeal to me somehow, not even in the summer. And it wasn't very clear, and I gave up in the end looking.
So do you think it might be possible to sort of include something a bit more general, like the customer experience in our leisure centres?
Yeah, we could do that. I will talk to Councillor Kennedy, who will be coming as a cabinet member in the meantime, and have a meeting with him and the officers, and we will share some of these views with them to make sure that we get the answers that we want, to let them know what we're expecting and get the answers.
Yeah, perhaps I'll just a bit like with you, I'll just share with you then an experience that I've had where I did put in a complaint having joined, and I am still waiting for a response despite having tried to chase it various times. I've had automated bot responses from my complaint. I've never actually had a response. And in the last one, I even signed myself as Councillor Pennyroot just to see if that might make any difference whatsoever. Hasn't made any difference. I'm still waiting for a response. That's, a month ago nearly now. It's really not good enough.
I would like to also
I suggest you take it to your councillor out. I'm surprised you are your own councillor. Councillor
She's
Joseph's
here.
question. Councillor Joseph's here. I'm sure she'll take it up for you.
I've had the same trouble.
Councillor Ozen.
Yeah, we have 5 leisure centers running by GLL. Now it's better in the last 6-7 years, it's called. They all got different facilities. Some of them hasn't got swimming pools. Some of them hasn't got other facilities, all different things. And so, yeah, we need to look into that as well. But the surrounding area of all those leisure centers might be improved, especially for the people who feels lonely, old people. For example, Queensbridge Sports Centre, there's a huge area in front of the entrance area. It can be redesigned for the elderly, old people once they get there for their engagement with each other. Also, it can be not only sportive activities, also socially engagement. It can be used. Depends on the area, depends on the site. So you need to look into that as well, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you.
You hold those questions for our meeting, and
Yes.
we can get answers to them then. Can we agree the work programme then?
Yes.
Agreed. Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I'm going to close the meeting, and I'll see you all in.
The song.
Is it the 8th? 8th of November.
Yeah.